So I'm going to switch over to the 837 diamond burr, and oh, I didn't bring one out. You guys have in your trays, you have the white stones, the large rectangular stones. May I borrow one of those from you? So these are diamond cleaning stones. Thank you. So you see my diamond burr has some brownish areas right in here and a little bit black toward the tip. So that means it got overheated at one point, and they all do at some point. And a little melted plastic gets between the diamond particles and it doesn't cut as well. So we're going to cut into the diamond cleaning stone very fast. That's it, just instantly. And it cleans out that melted plastic. Now we can use the burr some more. So it pretty much doubles or triples the lifetime of the burr. All right, so let's go ahead and make some depth cuts on tooth number 6 here. So I'm going to take my angle from the middle third of this tooth, or this tooth, or this tooth, or the original. So that's the angle I want for the mid-facial. I'm going to keep the end of the burr about 1 millimeter above the gingiva. Keep checking your taper. And at that taper, we're going to reduce until we get the shoulder that I want. Keep checking the taper. Okay, now let's take the ball burnisher. There it is. So we're going to look down the wall, down the depth cut, and match the ball burnisher to the shoulder at the bottom. So right now we're probably about 0.8. So let's do a little bit more. So again, here's the taper I want. So use that taper. Reduce until you get the shoulder you want at the bottom. Okay, let's see what it looks like now. Okay. That's probably about right. We'll stop with that for right now. So let's do another couple of depth cuts in these embrasures. And again, 1 millimeter above the gingiva. This might be a little bit farther than we need to. But over here, lean the burr axially, push it axially. Have it as close as you can to the adjacent tooth and 1 millimeter above the gingiva. And go until you get 1 millimeter at the bottom. Okay, 0.7 or 8. Let's do a little more. So again, lean it axially, push it axially, have it close to the adjacent tooth. The same thing on the other side. So near the adjacent tooth, lean it axially, push it axially. And we want to make sure these two depth cuts converge incisally, because we want the prep to converge incisally. And then we'll check at the bottom and make sure we have the full millimeter. So maybe 0.75. I'll do a little bit more on that one too. Why not? So make sure you're happy with each one. Make sure you get the right taper. And at that taper, reduce until you get the right shoulder at the bottom. If the tooth is taller than the burr, I'm pushing it in and then I raise it up a little bit. Push it in at the taper I want and then raise it up a little bit. Okay, so again, check the axe reduction at the shoulder on each side. I can do a little bit more. And again, take your time, make sure you're happy. Then you don't have to do it again later. But again, notice the direction I'm looking each time. Okay, now on the facial. So I got the full millimeter now, 0.9, yeah, so a little bit more on both of those. Alright, so now I'm going to connect them together. Now I can feel the taper. Normally we want to look along the wall like this to make sure we have the right taper on anything, but I've made a depth cut so I can actually feel the taper with the burr, so I know I have the right taper. And then I'm going to look this way, so when I'm connecting them together, I'll know that I'm keeping the shoulder at the right level gingivally, all the way around into these other embrasures, or other depth cuts. So I start cutting the excess in between. I can always come back and check that taper. I know I'm coming around the corner. I know I'm staying above the gingiva. So again, I want to keep about 1 millimeter above the gingiva. I don't know how uniform the shoulder is yet because I haven't looked down the wall. But I'll do that in just a minute. Let's look down the wall and see where we are. Okay, so obviously I need to do more reduction in between those depth cuts. So I will. Again, here's the taper on the mid-facial. Match that as we're coming along here. And match this taper as we're coming along here. Ultimately, we want to have the ball burnisher just cover the shoulder everywhere. So still in between, we don't have enough. I can double check my taper like this, because that ultimately is the taper that I want. So my depth cut originally gave me a pretty good indication. But ultimately, you're going to compare it to the adjacent teeth. And make sure when you come around the corner that you lean the burr toward the axis. Okay, so now I'm getting a little bit more uniform shoulder. So we can still do a little bit more in there, but over here we're okay, and a little bit more in as we approach the embrasures. So 3 depth cuts, join them together, then we're going to angle the shoulder. Let's go ahead and angle the shoulder. I'm going to lean the burr this way a little bit, and not too much, just a little bit. And angle the shoulder all the way to the axial wall. Look this way so I can angle the shoulder all the way to the axial wall here, and then over here, and then over here. So I have a well-defined internal line angle for the PFM. That's what we want. You'll see later for the all ceramic, we're not going to want a well-defined internal line angle. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so now we did the 3 depth cuts, we joined them together, we angled the shoulder. I could do a little more axe reduction right in here. And angle the shoulder this way. Okay, so that's the basic facial reduction. Now, let's go ahead and reduce the incisal edge 2 millimeters. The burr is 1.2, so that gives us a pretty good idea where we are. and then down. Since it's a canine, we're going to make a cusp, so we're going to come down to the mesial side and then down to the distal side. Sometimes we shift that cusp over a little bit, but it's not terribly critical. I could shift it more to the distal. Ultimately, it's a matter of how much clearance we're going to have, but we'll get that with the lingual reduction, not the incisal reduction. Okay, and then I'm going to check the adjacent tooth like this, so I can make a secondary plane matching the angle of the adjacent tooth at the level of the occlusal third. I'm going to basically just put the burr against the adjacent tooth at this level, and if there's something to cut at that angle on my prep, then I cut it. So 2/3 like this, 1/3 like this, and I'm going to bevel this off right here. And I'm going to compare the incisor reduction to the adjacent teeth. That's probably where we started out. Typically on most typodonts, the facial cusps of the premolars and the canine line up pretty well, and about 1.5 millimeters longer than the lateral. So if that's the case over here, then we have a pretty good idea where we started, and that's probably representing about 2 millimeters of reduction. So we have a pretty good idea about that. All right, so let's now start the axe reduction for the chamfer on the lingual side, on the direct lingual and into the embrasures. We're going to go ahead and use the 878K014. This burr right here. I'll clean it a little bit. Okay, and again, it's a diamond cleaning stone. If you use this for carbides, it'll just kill your burrs, so that's not going to be very helpful. Okay, so I can do some of this lingual surface by direct vision. So I can get a little bit of an idea about the taper and the chamfer and the gingival position. But it's pretty limited how much I can do by direct vision there. But, I'm getting a chamfer that's, about half the ball burnisher, which we get automatically as long as we stop at the end of the burr at the margin. But most of it we're going to do in the mirror because it's much easier that way. So I can look along the wall this way, and I can see exactly where I am gingivally. I can see the taper, I can see the end of the burr at the margin. And I'll go all the way into the embrasure as far as I can go. So I'm leaning the burr toward the axis, and then I'm reducing until I see the end of the burr at the margin, with the margin in the correct gingival position. Again, notice I'm always looking along the wall, and the mirror makes it easy for me to do that. Without the mirror, I'd be in a big trouble. Okay, that's about as far as I can go with this burr. So let's switch over to the 877 burr, and we can do the rest of the reduction. So here's the 877-009. Okay, so again, small diamond burr. Don't think we need to clean that. There's some fibers on it, but I think we're okay. Now, again, let's go ahead and look from the lingual, and I'm going to come through the proximal. I'm going to keep the margin close to the gingula. So even though this is a Kilgore typodont, we have to have the margin pretty close to the gingula to get through without hitting the adjacent tooth. So I go gingivally as far as I need to get past the adjacent tooth, but I make sure that the end of the burr is always at the margin. And I'm tapering it as much as I need to, so I can avoid the adjacent tooth. Now look how close I am to the adjacent tooth. Pretty close, right? Like almost 0 millimeters away from it. So keep that in mind. If you're not seeing exactly what you're doing all the way along there, then you're going to have a problem. I'm going to keep coming through until I come out onto the facial surface. But again, I'm working back towards myself. I have the patient to the left, and I'm working back toward myself, and in the mirror, that's perfectly natural, just like driving a car, as we discussed. Okay, so now I've come out on the facial surface. So I'll be ready to join the chamfer and the shoulder there in a minute. Since I've already angled the shoulder, now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And again, Kilgore I put on a lot of times on the posterior teeth, like the premolars. That's a pretty big embrasure, isn't it? So it'd be pretty easy to go through there. But over here, again, we have to be seeing what we need to. Again, keep the margin near the gingiva all the time. Never let the margin rise up away from the gingiva. Keep the end of the burr at the margin always so you don't get a ski jump. And you have enough axial reduction. Taper it so you don't have to hit the adjacent tooth. And take it all the way through until it comes out onto the facial surface, where the shoulder is. You might be tempted to try doing the proximal reduction starting from the facial. Most people that try that don't do a good job. It gets to be pretty challenging. But this is pretty easy as long as you're comfortable using the mirror. So obviously we want to get comfortable using the mirror. Okay, so now we're getting through here, all right? How much is left? Not very much. Again, I see exactly where the end of the burr is. I see exactly where the margin is gingerly. Okay, so now I can go ahead and, from the facial now, I can go ahead and make sure the chamfer and the shoulder join smoothly. I keep the end of the burr at the chamfer margin and bring it over onto the shoulder margin. Then we get smooth, continuous margins all the way around, which is a necessity. You have to have smooth, continuous margins all the way around. Now I still have that wing there on both sides. In order to remove that, I'm going to lift the burr up incisively and just grind that off the wall. Just blend it together. And that's all I need to do there. Okay, so again, the taper, the size of the chamfer, everything we can adjust however we want. But again, we always have to be looking along the wall wherever we are. Look along the wall so you can see the taper and the gingival position and the end of the burr at the margin. Okay, so now all I have to do is the lingual fossa. So for that I'll use the football burr. So here's the football diamond burr, and I'm going to reduce the cingulum and leave about 1.5 millimeters wall height right here. I'm going to come up to the incisal edge and leave about 1 millimeter width up there. Then I'm going to come down the marginal ridge, starting with about 1 millimeter width at the incisal edge there, and come all the way down to the cingulum, and then come down the marginal ridge over here, leaving 1 millimeter width at the top, all the way down to the same level of the cingulum. So now I've got the concavity coming up the lingual surface. I have the concavity coming down the marginal ridge. I have the concavity coming down the marginal ridge here. Now I'm going to go back and forth in between on this side and make a concavity between the lingual ridge and the marginal ridge. Back and forth. Same thing over here. Back and forth. So I got a fossa over here on the mesial side, fossa over here on the distal side. So that's a pretty shallow fossa, nothing very dramatic. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and smooth it out a little bit. And I can use a carbide burr. So we have this large carbide burr in the burr block. It says 379F023. It's actually the H379F023. And so what that means is the H means diamond. So, I'm sorry, the H means carbide. So this is a carbide. But in your burr blocks, it has the diamond version of this. It's a fine diamond. So I'm going to show you that too. But anyway, I can take the carbide, turn it slowly, and we can just rub it around and create a little concavity on one side of the lingual ridge, and then create another concavity over here on the other side of the lingual ridge. And this burr gives automatically about the right amount of concavity. We can come back and smooth the incisal edges. Okay, that's the fine diamond. So let's see. So we can use this exactly the same way. Turn it slowly. And it'll polish up this area and take away the scratches made by the more coarse diamond. And it just looks better. And that's it. Okay, we can come back and we can smooth out the incisal edge if we want to. We can come back and redo the little bit of a facial bevel over there so we don't have any sharp edges.